We're going to talk about attending to your marriage, how our faith background can help. Okay? So before I say too much, I'd like to show you a couple of little clips from two tapes that I brought. Okay? First one is from the movie When Harry Met Sally. All right? And I want you to pay careful attention to this clip in particular because it's very short. All right? And the interactions that take place between the couple are quite meaningful and elegant. All right. But before we get to the clip, and hopefully this works. All right, we'll try it again. Someone else. There we go. We have power and action. There we go. Okay. So we're going to play the promos because I like the music. As it goes. Look at the hands if you want to. We're getting there. Very short.
I was sitting with my friend Arthur Coleman in a restaurant. It was a Untitled cafeteria. And this beautiful girl walked in, and I turned to Arthur, and I said, Arthur, you see that girl? I'm going to marry her. And 2 weeks later, we were married. And that's over 50 years later, and we're still married.
That says volumes. Okay. Enough of that one. Bear with me. Come back later for the rest of it. Here's the next one. It's from a documentary on marriage which PBS did about a year ago. And it's called Marriage, Just a Piece of Paper. We're not going to see the whole thing. Okay? But we are going to see a little clip. First person you're going to see on the screen is someone by the name of Cokie Roberts. She's the commentator. And then after that, you're going to meet Peter and Christine Poulos. Okay? For obvious reasons, I've selected this particular couple. Okay? All right. Hopefully this works. This clip's a little bit longer.
Men and women in their equal roles will be different and will shift over time.
Ever since the Middle Ages, when lawyers of the Roman Catholic Church proclaimed that marriage should be based on mutual consent between the couple rather than political arrangements between families, love has been central to our marriage tradition in the West. But if love is so important, how do we make it last? Is there one model of married love or several? Many religious leaders think the equal regard Judith Wells could not find in her marriage is central to all successful marriages. Peter and Christina Poulos have that kind of marriage of regard for each other. They each left successful medical careers to run a business together. They've managed to blend romance with everyday work in their candy store.
Marriage is a big, big sacrifice. And it's worth every minute of it if you share the challenge. And a little romance is good too, all the time. There's nothing wrong with going to the pub room and going dancing at nighttime. Or stopping, getting a babysitter and stopping for a couple of drinks and hold hands underneath the table and do something or send her some flowers. I'm 60 and she still likes me. Maybe a little different than she did when I was 180 pounds instead of 240. And maybe sometimes I live and I'm tired and maybe she'll help my hand and be different with me. I think that's sort of important. Sharing a life with someone. And that's I think the greater part of it. They say that chocolate is a romance of lovers. I mean, taking one of these guys, really ripping into it and giving out. Oh, pretty dark good. So I don't know. That's the romance. The strawberry and the chocolate. And I think it's a greater part of sharing it. Hold the hands and neck a little bit, you missed out. Want to try one? They're good.
Once the honeymoon is over, and all the frou-frou hoopla, and all the Victoria's Secret gowns, there is our real truth. And I think you really have to be open. Really, one has to give more than the other. As far as this compromise, that's bull-twinkies. I don't believe in compromise. Someone has to give more than the next person. He's the greatest guy in the whole world. The Wilson share virtue.
Okay. Forget about the content there.
It was just getting good.
That is the best part of the presentation, forget about the content. I really wasn't interested in you focusing in on the content, but instead the rapport that existed between these two couples. Okay? Look at that, I've already messed up. Okay, let me go back to the beginning. Give me a second, please. I know what's going to happen next. I'm going to be asked to check my virus stuff. Okay. We're getting there. Okay. I've yet to meet a couple who wasn't interested in being where these couples are. I've interfaced with thousands of couples, and I've prepared hundreds of couples for marriage. And without exception, I think anyone who's done that work in this room knows what I'm talking about here. Without exception, been met a couple that didn't want to be where these couples were or are 30, 40, 50 years after the engagement in the marriage. But the sad truth is that far too many are not getting to this place. But there is some good news also. You know the old joke, I've got some good news and some bad news. Well, this is kind of reversed. I've given you the bad news, now the good news. Your faith background can help you get to that place. But it doesn't always help. And what do I mean by that? When religiosity is high and when it's low. Now the term religiosity is one of these fancy terms that social scientists kick around. It just means to the extent that someone has placed importance on religion, okay? It measures the importance that an individual or a couple has placed on religion. And so that's what we're talking about when we use the term religiosity. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about high and low forms of religiosity. A couple's faith background. Our faith background, of course, is Christian, Orthodox. Can make a difference. But it largely depends upon their level of religiosity. If partners are struggling to integrate their faith background into their lifestyle, then it can make a decided difference, and vice versa. So what if it's high, and what if it's low? Let's talk a little bit about marital satisfaction here. Now, when researchers, let me just look and see what it's saying. Okay. When researchers look at non-religious populations of people, and they compare them with nominally religious populations, by that I mean people who haven't really spent a lot of time integrating their faith into their lifestyle. When they compare these two groups and look at the variable marital satisfaction, they really don't come up with any difference. Okay? But when researchers look at people who have integrated their religious background into their lifestyle, sort of like what Father was talking about earlier, okay? With non-believers and nominally religious people, they do see significant differences when it comes to marital satisfaction. Religious people or people with high religiosity tend to report higher levels of marital satisfaction. Let me also offer a few more examples. People with high levels of religiosity also experience higher levels of individual and family well-being, and they're also significantly less likely to divorce. So the question is why? You probably already have a general idea of why. I can't provide a complete answer in the next, 40 minutes or so. However, after I've completed the remainder of this presentation, you should have a better answer to this question. Then it'll be up to you, if you're interested, to learn more. So let's begin with this first observation. Our faith background helps us develop a personal relationship with God. Several years ago, when I did my dissertation, one component of the work was to look at the terms religion and spirituality, and ask two populations of religious people to talk to me a little bit about, first of all, what those two terms mean to them, and then secondly, as they were talking about them, it became very apparent to me that these two terms, religion and spirituality, were not separate domains of interest, but instead they were interrelated and interdependent domains of interest. Now, the reason I mention this is because in our society today, we hear the term spirituality. That's an appropriate term. It's a PC term, but we don't generally hear the term religion. When we do hear the term religion, it generally carries what? Negative connotations, doesn't it? That's correct. For the most part it does, depending on which venue you're located in. And so, I think one of the mistakes, I think Christians have fallen prey to this. What I'm saying here is they have undervalued or devalued religion and placed more emphasis on spirituality. But in effect, religion and spirituality for us, as I mentioned to you, are interdependent with one another. If you are practicing your Orthodox faith background, if you are struggling to integrate your Orthodox faith background into your lifestyle, as you do that, you develop a spiritual life. Another way of saying that is you develop a relationship with God. Okay? And this relationship has a transformative impact on us. It changes us. Look at Scripture as an example. Anyone who encountered Christ and responded to Him in a positive way would never see the world again in quite the same way. Their lens would change. It transforms us. Our relationship with God transforms us. But in addition to transforming us, it also impacts our interactions and our transactions with others around us. And since this is the case, then it follows that our relationship with God has not only a positive impact on us personally, but it also has a positive impact on our relationship with the closest person in our lives. If we're married, that of course is our spouse. Let me begin illustrating what I mean in terms of how our faith background can have a positive impact on our marriage, in addition to what I've said so far. And to help me, I want to refer you to just one verse in Scripture. And that verse is located in Galatians chapter 5, verse 22. Paul would write, "But the fruit of the Spirit," and this is appropriate since we're close to the weekend of Pentecost. "But the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control." What was St. Paul suggesting when he wrote this? One positive residual effect, I think he was saying that one positive residual effect related to our walk with Christ is that the Holy Spirit comes into our lives and it blesses us with the fruit of the Spirit. And this fruit can and does have a positive impact on our lives and in our relationships, and in particular our marriage. Let's look at that verse a little more carefully. Imagine this. If you're married, okay, you're in the grocery store. This only takes about 10 seconds to make this decision. But you're in the grocery store, and you're looking at that freezer with all the ice cream in it, okay? And you like nuts, but your mate, your partner doesn't like nuts, okay? You have a choice here, pretty much a choice, between the butter pecan and the chocolate chip. So what's it going to be? Okay. There are probably two very quick responses here. The first response is, if she likes chocolate chip, let her do what? The grocery shopping. That's one option, okay? That's one thought that will come into your mind at that moment. It takes like 10 seconds to figure this out. Although for some reason I'm always standing in front of this, trying to figure things out. But the Christian response, the loving response, the one that considers neighbor and self, would likely select the chocolate chip. Okay? So, to the extent that you've experienced God's love in your life, it will impact the choices that you make into the future. And those choices will oftentimes have an impact on your relationship with your wife or your husband. Okay? So hopefully by now you're getting where I'm going with this. Enjoy it. Let me ask this question here. Does anyone here know where St. Paul's letter to the Philippians was written? Obviously it was written in Philippi. Okay, don't say that. That's right. Yeah. Most of the time when I go and speak elsewhere, most people don't know. But it was written in jail. And yet, this is the irony. The irony is that the letter to the Philippians is one of the most joyful documents in all of Scripture. And yet, it was written in jail, one of the least likely places that you'd think anything like that would emerge. But it was written there because Paul had Christ's joy in his heart. So life's challenges, and marital challenges are no exception, are more tolerable when God's joy is in our lives. In the fruit, the spiritual fruit of peace, Jesus said, "My peace I give to you, not as the world offers peace." Life's problems are easier, and marital problems are no exception. They're easier to handle when God's peace is in our lives. And patience. Here are two statements. I want to ask you, which statement illustrates Christian patience? Sam, you're 3 hours late. Where have you been? I thought we agreed you'd call when you're late. Sometimes you can be so irresponsible. Your dinner's in the microwave. Get it yourself. I'm going to bed. Upon learning that he's eaten, she also adds, if you think that I'm going to spend my time cooking for nothing, you'd better think again. Honestly, you're so inconsiderate. That's one possible response to Sam's tardiness. Here's another one. Sam, you're 3 hours late. Is everything okay? I was hungry and ate without you. I missed our time together tonight. I thought we agreed that you'd call when you were late, but something happened. I was worried. Obviously, the second approach illustrates Christian patience. The second statement would also likely resonate better with Sam. To the extent that we have discerned that God has been patient with us, we become more patient with those around us. And our faith helps us do that. In kindness. Let me tell you a story. It's about a short story. It's about a couple, and they were feuding, and they've been feuding now for a couple of days, and they're both giving one another the cold shoulder. And he needs to get up in the morning by 5 o'clock. And he's thinking he might use his wife as an additional assistance in his efforts to get up at 5. But rather than to break the silence, he decides he's going to write a note. And on the note, it says, "Wake me up at 5 o'clock." He places it on his wife's pillow and he goes to bed. He wakes up at 9 o'clock, and when he sees the time, he's not happy. And he's about ready to go find his wife and give her a piece of his mind when he finds another note, and it's on his pillow. And guess what it says? It's amazing how unkind we can be to one another, how impatient we can be with one another, how unloving we can be with one another. And the reverse is also true. When Christ is in our hearts, isn't it true that we have a more higher probability of offering the loving response, of being more peaceful with some of the turmoil that exists in our lives between one another? We can be more patient. We can be kinder toward one another. In goodness, as God's goodness comes into our lives, God's goodness has a positive impact on us and those around us. In self-control, I have a small private practice, and over the past 6 months, I've seen all of these challenges, and each one of these challenges has undermined couples that I've seen, their stability. The temptations like cybersex and affairs and pornography and gambling and drug and alcohol abuse and overspending pervade our society today. They can, as I said to you, undermine marital satisfaction. But when Christ is in our hearts and the Holy Spirit comes into our lives, we are blessed with some self-control. And that self-control, it emerges simultaneously with our efforts to live out our Christian and our Orthodox lifestyle. So again, these are some of the ways that our faith background can have a positive impact on our marriages. In addition, our faith background helps us discern the value of forgiveness. Just a few months ago, we celebrated Easter, and we focused our attention on the Holy Cross. As Christ is hanging from the Holy Cross, as we focus in on the mystery of the cross and the meaning behind the cross, we experience God's forgiveness, and that forgiveness is restorative in nature. That forgiveness that we experience can also not only restore our relationship with God, but it has a direct impact on our interactions and transactions with others around us, and in particular, our spouse. Another story. I was doing therapy with a couple several months ago, They were going through a bankruptcy. And it was a kind of an ugly experience because he had withheld a lot of information from his wife over time. And the end result was that it not only did an impact on their pocketbook, but it also served to undermine the trust and the love and the understanding and the intimacy they enjoyed with one another. Anyways, as I was in the room with them, talking to them, I turned to her and I said, you know, she was having a real hard time. I said, you know, it seems to me that you might benefit from some forgiveness. And as soon as I said that, she really got angry. And that sometimes happens, and it's okay, because that's what therapists do. Okay? They try to stimulate pain. They perturb people sometimes. And she said, I could never forgive him. She got up and she left. And I finished the rest of the session with him alone. We rescheduled, and I didn't know whether she was going to come back or not. And she did. She came back. And she lost little time picking up where she left off. Sometimes there's some chit-chat, but in this case there wasn't any. Okay? And she said, I have a question for you. If I forgive him, does that mean that I have to also forget? Okay, that's where her hang-up was. And I said no. And then we talked a little bit about the value of forgiveness. And ultimately, she did forgive. And ultimately, in this relationship, it worked. And it was a pivotal point in the relationship and in the therapy. So forgiveness. Don't underestimate the value of forgiveness. And that forgiveness that I'm talking about is the forgiveness that we learn from our relationship with God. Our faith background also helps us embrace the value of Christ-like humility. When I travel around the country, sometimes I might ask this question, and sometimes I don't. What synonyms come to mind when you hear the term humility? It's not one of these terms that we use. It's kind of an antiquated, it's a throwback to another era or whatever. So these are some of the typical responses that I might get back. Someone might say, what comes to mind is second place. We live in a society that emphasizes first place. Second place is forgotten. Loser, or weakness, or humiliation, as in, I had to eat, or he had to eat humble pie. From a Christian perspective, humility hasn't anything to do with these observations. Humility has more to do with loving your neighbor as yourself. Humility is about God calling us to put aside our pride and take a one-down position to facilitate healing and understanding and trust and love. Let me give you an illustration of what I mean. And this is Sue and Pat, and it's not an unusual problem that couples today face. It's how to distribute housework and who's going to do what around the home. And this particular challenge had remained unresolved for this couple for a couple of years. And it was beginning to generate some nasty fights. When I saw this couple They had just had a nasty exchange over housework, among other things. And 2 weeks would pass from that nasty exchange, okay, until they began to broach the subject again, till they felt like it was safe to talk about the subject again. And during those 2 weeks, Sue had a number of thoughts cross her mind. Here are some of the thoughts that crossed her mind during that interim period. From the time they had that ugly exchange, to the time when they picked up the subject again. She was thinking, it's not fair. He's not doing any of the housework. It's not fair. This is the 21st century. He needs to change. I need to take a much harder position with him. But then she wondered, will this help? At other times, she had these thoughts that ran through her mind. There are many good things about Matt. He's no slacker. He does more than his share of the parenting and the yard work. He pays the bills and prepares his taxes, etc., etc. Okay? As a result of this self-talk that she was engaged in, she prayerfully decided to take a one-down position. This is where Christian humility took and played a very important role in this particular marriage, with this particular challenge. And she decided, as a result of his perspective of housework, she decided to assume the lion's share of the housework. Now, some today might interpret that as a cop-out. But in her mind, it wasn't a cop-out at all. It was a Christ-like response. Her decision to do this was predicated on her love for her husband and family, and her concern that this issue was proving to undermine marital satisfaction and family stability. Yet another example of how our Christian faith background can have a positive impact on our efforts to promote and sustain marital satisfaction. Here's another example. Our faith background introduces us regularly to the value of prayer. Now, during some of my workshops, I might ask the following questions of the couples who attend. First of all, I might begin with this question here. How many of you have tried praying? How many of you have tried praying? Raise your hands. Obviously, the response is usually unanimous. Okay? And then the next question. How many pray when you're experiencing challenges? I asked for a show of hands. Obviously, almost everyone again raises their hand. Okay? And then I ask, how many pray together on Sundays? Now, depending on whether they're inter-Christian couples or not, most will raise their hand. And then I ask the last question. How many pray together at home? And that's when people begin to fidget. And the show of hands is considerably less. I'm certain you'd agree that prayer is the lifeblood of any Christian lifestyle. It feeds and nurtures our souls. That's why St. Paul said, or encouraged us to pray constantly. I could offer numerous other quotes. Another quote from St. Basil that relates here is that without prayer, our souls wither and die. don't think anyone is in disagreement. Just as prayer is important to our individual religious and spiritual well-being, it's important to our marriage's well-being. The act of standing before our Creator with the closest person in our lives, while disclosing our innermost needs or lamenting our worst failings, can be a humbling, restorative, and empowering experience. And so I tell couples, if you're not praying together, you should try it. It will prove invaluable to your efforts to promote and cultivate marital satisfaction. Yet another way that our faith background helps us in our efforts to protect and promote and cultivate marital satisfaction. Our faith background helps us acquire a Christ-centered perspective of marriage. Make no mistake about it. There are a number of competing perspectives of marriage in our society. These perspectives can influence the way we view marriage, and in particular, through osmosis, many of us fall victim to these views of marriage. And our marriage, as a result, or our marriages, can suffer. Let me illustrate what I mean. I want to compare two paradigms here. The first one is our own Christian paradigm with a dominant paradigm that seems to pervade the discourse that's taking place in our society with regards to marriage. And the best way that I can describe it is this is a postmodern, a post-Christian, and secular perspective. So I'm going to be comparing these two. First of all, let's look at that figure, the lower part of the figure from here down. This is our society pretty much asks us to focus, or it focuses most of its attention on the lower part of this figure when it's talking about marriage. It doesn't talk about the upper part. And in fact, there's some debate about the lower part of this figure here. We can't even define marriage anymore. In essence, a lot of people are talking about whether the term marriage is even a relevant term these days. Okay? All of that information has a negative impact on marriages today. Think about it. Okay? From a Christian perspective, from here down isn't enough. It's incomplete. We don't just simply talk about the interactions and transactions and the dynamics that take place between husband and wife. We also consider the upper part of this figure. And in fact, I would argue, and I think most of you would probably agree, the upper part is the most important part of this figure. The part that talks about a husband's relationship to God. The part that talks about a wife's relationship to God. And also the part that talks about the couple's relationship to God. So much different than that postmodern, post-Christian, secular perspective of marriage that we're getting on a daily basis. Let me just offer a few more differences here. You know, I was driving in to Boston last night. I stopped about 50 miles outside of Boston. The weather just didn't permit me to go much further. But the conversation I was listening to on the radio kept me going for a little longer. It was about same-sex marriage. The debate on same-sex marriage. I'm not sure if any of you were listening to AM radio last night. I think it was WBZ something. whatever, what is it, in the WBCR, I think, or something. Anyways, they were talking about, they were debating same-sex marriage and whether it's an appropriate or inappropriate. And I guess one of the reasons is because Massachusetts, it's a really hot-button topic politically in this state here. And in effect, what I was hearing here from the proponents of same-sex marriages, why not? Let's change the rules. After all, the rules have been changed in the past. So why not change the rules? Why not expand the definition of marriage to include same-sex couples? Okay? That was coming from this perspective. Marriage is simply a social construction. You know, we get to define marriage. Marriage has over time been conceptualized, or over time we as a species, and I'm using some technical terms here, we as a species over time have determined through consensus that marriage is good, and we can determine how to define it as the social needs change, as our social needs change. And since we are living in a society that encourages us to be inclusive, why not? That's coming from a social constructivistic perspective. And it's purely postmodern, and it's purely post-Christian, and it's definitely secular, because it omits God in the equation. But we as Christians, and there were some questions that were coming in, and people who of faith were having a real hard time putting their finger on why isn't it appropriate to expand the definition. And they were sort of like touching on why it isn't appropriate, but they weren't putting their finger on why it's not appropriate. At least from a Christian perspective, it's not appropriate for us to expand this definition because it's a God-given lifestyle. And as we understand it, and clearly, we just have to look at Genesis in the first couple of chapters in Genesis to validate what I'm talking about. It's a relationship between a man and a woman. Okay? And so, again, one of the differences. Marriage is also viewed from a postmodern, post-Christian perspective as temporary today. Recently, I came across, you've heard about starter homes? I came across this author who was trying to advocate advocating that it's unnatural for people to stay together throughout the entire life cycle, and to sort of illustrate what he was to sort of reinforce what he was saying. He used this metaphor of starter marriages, saying just like people enter into starter homes and then grow out of them. People enter into marriages and they grow out of them. They're temporary. And some of you may have also heard the other metaphor, serial marriages. We come in and out of marriages as our needs change and as our needs grow. That's a purely postmodern and post-Christian perspective of marriage. And I submit to you, a destructive way of looking at marriage. And the ramifications of this kind of philosophy, this kind of lifestyle. I mean, you can, I'll leave it to your own imagination, but they're not good. From our perspective, marriage is never temporary. Marriage is eternal. We don't, as Orthodox Christians, we don't just simply talk about until death do us part. Many of the fathers of the church talk about this relationship that endures and continues even after death, because love relationships circumvent death. So we're really talking about marriage as eternal rather than temporary, and how much more beneficial is that perspective than the other one to our marriages. And marriage isn't a disposable commodity. It's a gift. It's a gift from God. We live in a throwaway society. Again, all of these little images and metaphors, they play a part in the way our society views marriage. And in effect, the residual effects of these, through osmosis, affect and infect our people and their perspective of marriage. And so, because we live in a disposable, we live in a society, a throwaway society, some people take it to the next level. You talk about marriage as a disposable commodity, but it's not. It's a gift from God, an enduring gift from God. And as we embrace it and understand it, it blesses us many times over across the life cycle. And what we understand about marriage when we're engaged will be so much different than what we understand about marriage with regards to where those people were that I showed you earlier, 30, 40, 50 years after the marriage, and the many blessings as a result. Well, so marriage is sometimes viewed as a business partnership rather than a holy partnership. This metaphor of the business partnership, sometimes I refer to this as the Donald Trump approach to marriage. And you know, if you pay close attention to his perspective, it really is this perspective of marriage. If Donald Trump was here, he might say something like, in our society, it's assumed that both partners will work together in partnership to establish a home and create a family. They will acquire property, have joint bank accounts, co-sign all major loans. I forgot about the prenuptial agreement, by the way. Should the partnership become seriously compromised, he might also say then either partner can terminate the arrangement. Again, that business relationship. When this occurs, the courts divide the couple's assets, consider any outstanding debts, and determine each partner's responsibilities to their offsprings. But marriage is not just simply a business partnership. It's a holy partnership. We enter into a holy partnership. And it's governed not according to business rules and regulations, but instead according to what our faith background teaches. To the extent that we seek to incorporate what our faith background teaches into our lifestyle, it has a direct positive impact on our marriages, and definitely has an impact on marital satisfaction. Marriage is not simply a legal contract. We wouldn't have a real problem with that, but it's not just simply a legal contract. It's also a holy covenant. When we get married, we enter into a relationship sort of like this. And I tell this to young couples before they get married. When you stand before God's altar on the day when you receive the sacrament of marriage, you are in effect placing your marriage in God's hands, with the understanding, with the belief that as you place this in God's hands, God will take care of it and care for it. And that's the holy covenant of marriage. And it's based solely on belief. But how much different is that from what our society teaches? And marriage is not simply an arrangement between two individuals. In our society, we emphasize the individual. In our faith tradition, we certainly emphasize the individual, but we also talk about individuals entering into a community, the community of marriage. Okay. In our society, where 40% of the marriages are failing, and 50% of married couples report low levels of marital satisfaction. I just want to make sure you understand what I just said. Let's assume that these 10 fingers represent all of the marriages in this country. And let's assume that 40% of them, and that's a conservative figure, are ending in divorce. So we have 60% left. Of those 60%, when researchers poll these couples and ask them, how happy are you? 50% of them will state that they're not very happy. So what are we talking about? We're talking about around 30% of the couples in our country reporting moderate to high levels of marital satisfaction. Also in a society where only 50% of all marriages will see their 20th anniversary, and where 30% of the children will grow up without one of their parents, and that parent is generally the father. It's kind of meaningful because we're coming up against Father's Day also. And it's too bad because, you know what, and I don't want to digress too much, we talk a lot about motherhood, but we hardly talk about the benefits of fatherhood. And fathers are every bit as important to children's development as our mothers. Also, in a society that encourages us to attend to individual needs, and think about this for a moment. It talks about the importance of individual needs. You know, take care of yourself, lose weight, eat properly, whatever. It talks about family needs all the time. We're always talking about family needs, and the importance of family. It talks about career needs. It talks about children's needs. But our society repeatedly falls short of talking about marital needs. As a result, I hope I've begun to help you understand how your faith background can help you attend to your marriage in this divorce culture in which we live. Okay. All right, well, thank you.